right, I will ring us in and I will ring us out. We'll bring attention to the posture of the body. Find a posture that is comfortable, but not so much so that you might get sleepy. And a posture that is alert, but not so alert that it'll become uncomfortable. Something in between, something sustainable. Take note of any tension in the body that you might be able to let go of. Feel free to wiggle it out if you need to, or stretch it. Maybe in the face or the neck or shoulders. Let go of what you can, and if tension still remains, that's fine too. And allow attention to rest with the touch points beneath the body, places where the body makes contact with the earth, with the chair, with a cushion. And bring attention to touch points on top of the body, places where objects make contact with the skin. This could be clothing, jewelry, or spectacles. This could be hair, or maybe other parts of the body. This can also be the air. It might be felt as warmth or coolness, maybe movement or stillness. And allow attention to move inward to sensations inside the body. This might be the movement of breath in the abdomen or the chest. This might be sensations of tension or softness in the muscles. It could be digestion. It could be heartburn. There might be sensations of pain or pleasure. All of these sensations together, the touch points beneath the body, the touch points on top of the body, the touch points within the body, might be felt collectively as a sense of the whole body. Can the attention zoom out such that it just senses the body as a whole, sitting here, breathing right now? And what's that like? Does the body feel like it has a shape? Does it feel like it has a texture? What is this body like right now? And of course, with attention on the body, the mind may have the tendency to wander off occasionally, and that's fine and it's normal. And just bring attention back to the body, back to this felt sense of embodiment. And having established some degree of mindfulness with the body, without letting go of the sense of the body, turn some attention to mindfulness itself. What's the mind like? Perhaps there's calm and spaciousness. Perhaps there's agitation or worry. And sometimes when we have attention in the body, it feels like we're looking at it from above, like the mind is watching the body. But what might it be like to watch the mind with the body? What might it be like to use this sense of embodiment to witness the condition of the mind? Do these two things have to be separate? What is it like to hold this whole field of experience, mind and body, as an object for awareness, as an object for attention? Nothing needs to be excluded. And the mind will wander, the mind will get distracted. And just bring attention back to the present moment's experience. And take note of the quality of the mind when it comes back, the quality of attention when it realizes it's been distracted. What is that mindful return like? Misha, it's good to see you, or see your Zoom avatar. So it's okay. We're late to things sometimes. So I've never been to the Sunday group, so I don't actually know the whole format. I didn't know if you all necessarily do full half-hour sits or any of that stuff. Um, but it's a nice small group, and so I feel like it's a good opportunity to uh, have more discussion. And so this is going to be the challenge for me. I'm so used to the 40-minute talks. I'm going to see if I can keep this to significantly less so that we have time for some discussion with everybody. And my understanding is that you've been working with the Four Noble Truths and that you did the first and second Noble Truth in the last couple of times meeting, right, Amrit, I assume? And so that would put us at the third Noble Truth tonight, this morning. It's not tonight. I don't speak in the mornings very often. Um, yeah, so this is kind of my favorite truth. I mean, you shouldn't have favorites when it comes to noble truths, but this is kind of my favorite truth. Um, Mostly because it represents kind of the inflection point in the trajectory of the Four Noble Truths. And the first Noble Truth, as we know, is the truth of suffering, the fact that suffering is not a problem, that it's a feature. It's not a glitch in the matrix. It's actually just how things go. The second noble truth being the origin or the cause of said suffering, which, as we know, is craving or desire or clinging or grasping, attachment, all the different ways that craving or clinging can happen. And I think those first two noble truths is kind of why sometimes people think Buddhists are kind of a negative lot. It's because we just like focus on suffering or life is suffering. You hear all of that stuff. Um, you know, but the second noble truth is kind of like where that ends, right? And as we transition into the third noble truth, this is where the inflection point. It's almost like the first two noble truths could be thought of as the bad news, if you want to call it that. And the third and fourth noble truth could be thought of as the good news. I don't actually think the first noble truth is necessarily bad news, by the way. I think the fact that it's not my fault is good news, but we can stick with it kind of being bad news. But when we get to this third noble truth, which is the truth of the cessation of suffering, that it is the cessation of this desire through its complete and utter rejection, abandonment, giving up, and non-association. So this notion that suffering is caused by clinging, this suffering is caused by craving. The word we use typically is tanha, right? Which I guess directly translates as thirst. And that suffering is caused by thirsting for sense pleasures, thirsting for becoming, for things to be a certain way, for us to be a certain way, and thirsting for non-becoming, for things to stop being a certain way, for things to come to an end. The good news is that if we can figure out ways to not thirst for sense pleasures, not thirst for becoming, and not thirst for non-becoming, we might not suffer. And so essentially, it's just a reverse of the second noble truth. If the second noble truth is the cause of suffering is this thirst, this craving, then this is saying, well, the cause of the end of suffering is non-thirst, non-craving. And so it's simple, right? It's a reverse of the causal chain that's mentioned in the second noble truth. But I think, and this is something Jeff may have mentioned in one of our group chats, I think he was talking about having had discussions about how this is interpreted, the third noble truth. And I think a lot of people interpret the end of suffering as if it were in capital letters, like the capital T, end capital E of suffering capital S, right? And I think that notion is built into it. The end of suffering, right? Final end of suffering, nibbana, nirvana, final awakening. Like that notion, I think, is absolutely built into this third noble truth. The idea that somehow, some way, we might crave nothing. Somehow, some way, we might cling to nothing, have attachments to nothing, that we might grasp at nothing ever. Sure, I suppose that's built into it, and that might be an end goal. But if we think of the noble truth as the third noble truth as only describing this final end of suffering, it sounds a little daunting. It doesn't exactly sound accessible, and it definitely sounds like something I could put off till a future lifetime, right? In the sense of like I, I don't know if this is going to happen this time around, right? But I don't necessarily think the third noble truth is saying just that. I think it's also pointing towards lowercase sufferings, lowercase n's. And so it might also be thought of as like the gradual piecemeal relinquishing of individual cravings, of individual attachments. And, it's when I think of it this way, I like to, I invite myself to just think of anything in our life. The first thing that comes to mind for me is like alcohol or drugs, but like anything in our life that we may have let go of once and tasted the freedom that followed. It doesn't have to be something as dramatic as alcohol or drugs. There could be something that we've clung to in the past that when we finally let go, we notice a certain degree of freedom on the other side. And like this is the type of end of suffering that I think the third noble truth points to for those of us on the path towards awakening. I don't think it's one of these things where we suffer intensely as long as we practice, and then one day we have a final awakening where we suffer not at all, right? I think it's a gradual path, a gradual path of increasingly less suffering, which means we are increasingly craving less. We are increasingly clinging to less. And some of the invitation in the meditation towards the end, in noticing when the mind is wandering and then coming back from, say, a distraction or wherever our mind went, is it's typically in that moment of mindfulness when we come back to the present moment that we have the most clarity of mindfulness. And that tends to be the moment when, however briefly, we may have cut some moment of clinging or craving, some kind of causal chain towards suffering. The monk Ajahn Brahm, and I know this rubs people the wrong way sometimes when he says it, but the monk Ajahn Brahm basically says, if you sit down to meditate and you tell yourself that you're not going to get distracted, that you're just going to focus on your breath, that means that every time you got distracted, that was clinging. Everything you went towards, everything you moved towards, it was the mind reaching out and grasping for it, right? And so we can think of like even our meditation practice as every time we come back to the present moment, we're to a certain extent relinquishing some clinging, craving, attachment, something that kind of like snagged the mind in some way. Now, are these clingings and cravings that we might pick back up? Absolutely, right? And so I think there's all these stages. There's clingings or cravings that we can let go of that we pick back up later. And then we have to let go of again that we pick back up later. I do this with Doritos all the time. I'm done. I pick you back up. I'm done. I pick you back up. And then there's probably like some of these smaller versions of cravings that we can let go of that maybe we do eventually relinquish them for good, right? We're not talking about final awakening here, but we're talking about maybe there's some times, whether it's people, whether it's relationships, whether it's ideals about ourself. There might be some things that we've been attached to in the past that something happened in life where we gained enough wisdom to realize that maybe it wasn't worth clinging to that anymore. And we might now experience freedom from those things. And don't worry, we have plenty of other ways that we suffer. And so we're still not awakened, but we have gradually moved in the direction of relinquishing or letting go of some of our graspings. I think some people don't like this idea of like abandoning craving or abandoning like relinquishing or renouncing certain things. Those are kind of words that have like a negative connotation. And some folks don't even like the idea or the phrase letting go. And I think letting go is used a lot because it implies the opposite of clinging, right? It implies the opposite of grasping. And then there's that whole metaphor that as we know, as at least if we're Buddhist practitioners and we kind of have adopted some of its philosophy, we tend to agree with the fact that things are impermanent, that things change, that they're not ultimately in our control, which means that whenever we hold on to something, we're going to get rope burns, right? And that is our suffering. And so letting go kind of makes sense if you think of all of our suffering being like an inevitable loss to the tug of war of life, right? We're always going to get rope burns. But maybe letting be is another way of framing relinquishing here. There's things that we might notice the mind wanting to get involved with, whether it's seeing your partner doing something in the house a particular way, and my mind thinks like maybe that could be done a little bit better or a little bit different, and I could totally interject my opinion here, but maybe I'll just let it be. Like these are ways of also working with this, like recognizing when the mind wants to like move out and adjust and turn the dials of experience, and realizing that nah, I don't need to do this. Ajahn Chah said that if you let go a little, you will have a little peace. If you let go a lot, you'll have a lot of peace. If you let go completely, you will know complete peace and freedom. And then your struggle with the world will have come to an end. And so I think when we talk about this third noble truth, I think it's useful to think of to consider like kind of the end game. I think it's useful to consider something like final awakening as maybe the ideal. But I think it's best for us as like everyday practitioners to consider the ways that we find freedom regularly. Consider the ways that we might relinquish regularly in regular everyday life in small bite-sized morsels. And in this sense, it's hopeful. And back to this notion of the transition from the second noble truth to the third noble truth being kind of like an inflection point. I feel like for me personally, like I want to say the first 10 years of my practice were definitely first and second noble truth practice. Like for me, it was just my life is suffering, everything sucks. The Buddha was so right, everything sucks. I'm totally craving. All of my suffering is because I craved. And I think a lot of people may go through that door and follow that path in the very beginning of practice. I mean, ultimately, did we come here in the first place because of suffering? Probably. Was our suffering, all of our individual sufferings different? Probably. But I don't think if our lives were going well and if our lives, everything was perfect and there wasn't some subtle sense of dissatisfaction, we would ever have sought a path to do anything different in the first place, right? And so the entry point is typically suffering. But I know that roughly 10, 12 years into my practice, I feel like my practice became less about suffering and more about joy and more about freedom and more about like what we would think of as the positive qualities of mind that come following some degree of letting go, following some degree of mitigated suffering. And so if I was to characterize it uh, like in simple fashion, I feel like my first 10 years of practice was like uh, joy, or excuse me, dukkha or suffering aversive. I was kind of like running from suffering. And I think ever since it's been running to joy, running to contentment, running to peace. Not that I don't suffer anymore, but my focus has been more on trying to notice the qualities that arise when suffering has ceased. And that's kind of what the invitation was with the meditation there. Like, what is the mind like when we come back? Sometimes, when we do, I'm not sure how many folks in here have worked with like the hindrances when they practice, the hindrances of uh, essentially greed, aversion, restlessness, worry, sloth, torpor, sleepiness, doubt, all the things that kind of prevent us from being present and content in any given moment. Sometimes when we work with those in meditation, it can become like a very negative kind of meditation because all we're doing is kind of playing whack-a-mole with all the things that are wrong with our mind. And the invitation when it comes to like the third noble truth then is to, instead of playing whack-a-mole with all the negative stuff that keeps coming up, what if we played like whack-a-mole, or not even whack-a-mole? What if we just brought our attention instead to the space between those negative things when they arise? What if we bring attention to the space between the distractions rather than the distraction itself? What if we bring attention to the space between anger and clinging and craving and dissatisfaction, instead to the peace that likely exists when those things aren't present? And I think that's what this third noble truth is pointing towards. And so, in that sense, it's hope, right? In that sense, it points in the direction of what life might be like, um, where there's more freedom, where there's more contentment, and where there's more joy. And there's, of course, more I could say, but I'm not going to do that today. I do want to hear from folks in the room and give us all a little bit of space to share either about your practice today, about what you think of the third noble truth, or anything else that might be coming up for you. So thank you. Don't make me call on people. I'm guessing Jeff is having toddler issues right now. Yeah, go ahead, Kevin.
Thank you, Matt. That was great. Great talk. I appreciate these Four Noble Truths. I guess I could say this is one of my favorites. Uh, it's a good one anyway. I understand it as a gradual process that eventually would, it makes sense if I'm suffering less now than I was when I began, that there could be an eventual ending. It seems like that something's decreasing, that makes sense. And the I think the thing is, it's working for me. So I think my suffering's down probably by more than half and I've been just practicing, practicing, not just thinking about it, actually doing things for maybe like 3 years, maybe. So it's proven to, work. So of course I'm going to keep doing this path. So yeah, I don't have a problem. I'm surprised to learn. I'm not aware that there's resistance to these things and discussion over the words and things like that. Like, just for me, just yeah, it just works. So, and so learning more and more about the path, or hearing more teachings and things like that, it's coalescing, and then different areas of my life, seem to be kind of merging into one, and along this sort of this path. Really, it's just, I think it just, as it proves to work more, I want to do it more, and I find I start, it's more my intention to do that, and I find more ways to do it, and just kind of like there's a boost or something, or I'm pulled along a little bit. Um, so yeah, I guess that's a pretty simple look at it, but it just works for me.
I like how you can quantify the level of suffering you've had in your life. It's like 50% less now. That's awesome. I think the resistance comes from uh, just like it's hard to grasp the notion that the human mind might not suffer at all. Like that like it might be possible for even when like physical pain is happening in the body, for the mind to not fire the proverbial second arrow, right? You know what I mean? Y'all know what I mean by second arrow, right? First arrow is kind of like pain, and the second arrow would be, the suffering that we layer on top of it in wishing that it weren't so, right? And so there's a lot of folks who have a hard time imagining a human mind that might experience the death of loved ones, might experience physical pain, um, and not wish it were other, to such an extent that it caused suffering. And so I think that's where some of the resistance is. Because I have heard some teachers, I knew Jeff was going to say something here, but I've heard some teachers say that there is no end to suffering, right? It's just our relationship to it changes, yeah, and stuff like that. But I think the teaching is pretty clear that there is the possibility of a mind eventually.
So I don't feel things less either. I imagine that, attending some Zen things, so I'll be detached from everything and not feel anything and just be totally fine with whatever happens. I think my mind is more unified now because I'm letting go of some of these little things that were running in the background of anxiety or whatever, gradually. Or letting go is a better way of saying that, I think. And so then whatever does happen, I'm more present for it. I feel it more deeply. It's Things are really painful and difficult. This isn't, like haven't really experienced a lot of joy, I think, or just, I have had moments of peace though. but I feel things more intensely for sure. And that, the painful things are really painful. I think it's worse in some ways because I was shielded from it before by this, all this complexity of the, or I'm only experiencing things partly or something. But I mean, so that's not what we're saying is suffering, right? That's just normal life and the emotions and things like that. It's the me clinging or, yeah, the whatever the kind of intellectual or emotional machinery around like trying to not be able to deal with this or wishing it was different or being attached to different outcomes. I think, like you're saying, the second error that's the suffering. So I won't say it's like everything's great, at all. And sometimes it does feel worse because if you're look, teaching, you're developing the capability to see things as they are, and things are kind of bad sometimes. Like you're experiencing it more deeply. So yeah, it's that second arrow, that all that complexity that's reduced for me.
Thank you. I think it was Gloria Steinem that said, "The truth will set you free, but first it's gonna hurt." And I think there's truth in that. Jeff, what do you got to say?
So I actually do know a couple people who uh have like really strong resistance to the idea that suffering can end in this lifetime. And one of them is like really falls into that category of like, well, it's as many passes over the mountain, or like the mountain is 3 miles wide and 3 miles long and 3 miles tall, and there's a eagle with a silk scarf in its beak, and every time it passes over the mountain, it takes a little bit off. And however many times that eagle has to pass over the mountain is like until the mountain is gone, is that's how many lives there are before you get to sort of the end of things and realize the end of suffering in reality. I don't remember if that's a Buddhist thing or a yogic thing, or I guess you've never heard it. There's another one where the guy is talking about like the number of leaves on a tree is the number of lifetimes left before you stop suffering. And my like one of my best friends, sort of who I don't really talk to anymore, since personally getting sober. But he kind of used that as an excuse, like, wow, well, I might as well just keep drinking because that's all there is to do in this lifetime. I might as well keep using and uh, you know, create more suffering for myself, basically, because there's no hope. Um, yeah, which like that is not super compelling to me, but my other friend, um, actually I think does make a pretty compelling argument, which is that like if you take reincarnation to be the kind of like continuation of karma, such that uh like maybe take reincarnation as something metaphorical and say that like I'm the reincarnation of my dad in the sense that I'm trying to answer a lot of the same questions that he had to answer in his life. Like, what does it feel like to be ADHD and never finish your projects or whatever? That's something that he handed down to me. That's my karma now, and I'm gonna keep living it. And it is like kind of I'm really excited to learn that the correct word is thirst, because that really satisfies the my understanding of it better than any of the other words I've tried to use. But that's like a thirst, like I want to finish my project and then I like work on it and then I get distracted or I lose steam or whatever and it goes away and then I feel terrible and then I thirst for it again or whatever. And so there's like suffering involved in that loop. And to end that suffering, my other friend suggests, would also not just cause the cessation of, you know, my personal suffering, but also like the need for that sort of familial reincarnation. And like, I don't know if any of this is like you're following. I'm going to try to wrap it up soon here. But like the idea is that like the suffering that we experience in our civilization is kind of load bearing. Like there's a requirement for you to suffer in order to be seen as a member of society. Like if we're not always complaining and like showing our concern for our loved ones by um, demonstrating that we're like afraid for them or that, like if we have like too much equanimity, it can come off as callous or complacent. And so like there actually is a certain amount of suffering that like you can let go of by going off to join a monastery, but then like you're celibate and there's no continuation of family, right? So it's almost like anti-family to or like anti being embedded. Even your boss at work requires you to suffer a little bit in order to uh, you know, demonstrate that you care about the business or whatever. So um those are I have a bunch more thoughts on suffering, but those are the first ones that that I wanted to share.
Thank you, Misha.
Hello.
Hey.
Sorry, I was a little bit late. I'm also watching the Beta Breakers right now, so I didn't want to mess up everyone's like piece from meditation. Um, I love the noble truths, and I really thank you for your share today. For me, it has been so freeing to find this path, and I think that like as humans, sometimes we love to cling to our suffering. And sometimes, like, we don't know who we are without that. And I think, similarly to what Jeff was saying, I think that, like, as human beings, we all just want connection. And it's like so easy to connect with others over complaining and over, like, talking about everything that's wrong in the world, and especially like in a world that has so much wrong in it, like it's so easy to go there instead of like talking about what's good in the world. And so I love the third noble truth because it's that constant reminder that in every moment I have a choice of how I want to respond to what's happening. And that choice is either going to lead me to liberation or it's going to lead me to more suffering. And so I I love as like as I implement it in my life, not only does it like increase my faith in the practice, um, but also like increases my faith in myself that I know that I can do this and that I can choose to respond to things differently. I can, um, just make a different choice in every moment instead of like what we're so ingrained to do, which is really like we love to just like relish and like a pig in its mud bath, like just like lay all up in our suffering and like enjoy it. And so I definitely love what the third noble truth has brought to my life, and just that knowledge that I can always like choose something else. So thank you so much.
I think we have time for one more share, roughly.
Can I just make a quick comment? I wish we had a lot more time because this is like, yeah, I have a lot of thoughts too. Just real quick then. So, what Jeff was saying, so I find myself to be a lot more productive. I also have neurodiversity, and I strongly have, I don't know if reincarnation is, whatever, but I'm strongly connected with my ancestors and solving those problems. I'm a lot more productive at those. I'm not like setting aside any sort of difficulties or productivity or anything like that. It helps with that a lot because I'm not creating. I'm spinning in these kind of loops or whatever. It makes me less mindful of what the task I'm actually trying to do is, or um, whatever problems I'm trying to solve, maybe from my ancestors or that have arisen in my own life, or both. It works a lot better. with this mindfulness practice. I'm not like, I don't find productivity or the difficulty of different tasks or whatever to be suffering. It's just how it's the condition of life. There's nothing in the Buddhist path that is pulling me away from any sort of responsibilities or ancestral things or whatever. It's deepening my understanding of it, and I'm getting better at that. So
Yeah, and I'm kind of thinking about what you're saying, and then also what Jeff talked about, this notion that a certain degree of equanimity might be met with in the world. It could rub people the wrong way. A lot of the times our familial relations, our friendly relations, our romantic relationships, a lot of those kind of have built into them a certain degree of clinging. You know, I think, but like if you look at people, like I'll use the Dalai Lama, but Mal has hung out with some of these monks that are doing that did that walk for peace, and she went to their monastery last week, I think. And these are folks who are just like perpetually happy and joyous. And I feel like when all of the awakening factors, all of the paramis are well cultivated in a person, equanimity is there, but I don't think most people would feel in the presence of someone like the Dalai Lama that they are being kind of ignored, that their suffering is being ignored. I think like we tend to think of it as equanimity as like a standalone quality. It is one of the many qualities that we cultivate. But I agree. I feel like, when we're in the world, there's a certain expectation. There's a certain expectation that we suffer with and along with everybody else. And that if you don't, it's almost like performative suffering. And I think that's true. It reminds me of the story of Ajahn Chah, and I think it was Joseph Goldstein, and they had to get from one monastery to another in Thailand, and they hitched a ride. I don't know if it was a tuk-tuk or something like a tuk-tuk, but like some very dangerous vehicle up a windy road in a mountain. And the driver was driving very fast, and Joseph was like clinging, like just grasping like on the handles of the thing because he thought he was going to be flung off the road down like into a deep canyon. And he looked over, and Ajahn Chah was also gripping very hard, but he didn't have like a look of terror on his face. And when they got off, Ajahn Chah just kind of looked at him and said, "Terrifying, wasn't it?" with a big smile on his face. It was something like that, which is kind of like, can we have these terrifying, suffering moments and meet them with a smile, and also not have people get offended by it, right? That's a different story. But I think that's like kind of what we're pointing towards, like this recognition that, yeah, that was terrifying. All right, let's do it. That kind of thing. But we are out of time. And by the way, there is talk. Ram did mention that we might be, this might be moving to a regular kind of style 90-minute group at some point. Because it is tough to do like shorter meditations and little Dharmet talks and smaller discussions. So I think that's the trajectory. But let me put in, I think everybody here knows, so I probably don't have to, but I'll put it in here, that we have Donna here if you so choose, and I will close with the dedication of merit. And if we want to hang out for a couple of minutes, that's cool too. We would not be living here today were it not for the selflessness of so many people. They shared with us such that we might live. We would not be practicing here today were it not for the generosity of so many people. They shared with us such that we might find happiness. May our lives and practices be adequate expressions of the gifts we've received. May our hands repurpose those gifts for the benefit of all beings.
thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much, Matt.
Good to see you, Mal. Mal
Good to
is
see-
my father's partner, and she's in North Carolina. So it was like a very familial and friendly group this morning. It was cool.
Thank you very much.
All right, have a good Sunday, everybody.
I was going to say good night, but good morning to everyone.